Our reading this morning is from Acts chapter 27. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said, and because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called a northeaster, struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they'd been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. Behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And for our meditation today, what does a wandering apostle know about sailing? So Julius, the centurion, decides to go with the advice of the sailors rather than the advice of this strange man he is charged with delivering to Rome. It was, of course, a fateful decision. The storm struck fiercely, and they were driven to their wits' end. It looked very, very bad. When even seasoned sailors are frightened enough to pitch overboard the ship's tackle, the fear of death is just around the corner. In the midst of such great anxiety, Paul received a visitor. An angel of God appeared and spoke to him. "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. Behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you." Peace, then. Whatever form Paul's death would come in, it would not be death at sea. At least not before he'd spoken to Caesar about the hope of the resurrection. As the storm raged on and the anxiety on the ship increased, Paul sought to bring them into his peace. "You should have listened to me," he begins, "for then there would not have been this great loss of property and danger to life. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship." You can imagine the incredulous looks that Paul received as he stated this so calmly and so certainly. As their faces clearly asked, "How do you know?" he told them. He had learned it from an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And that God happened to be the Lord of the sea as well as of the dry land. Did Paul remember and pray Psalm 107 during those long hours of waiting, which says, "For he commanded and raised up the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. He made the storm be still. He brought them to the desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man." So Paul says, "Take heart, men, for I have faith that in God it will be exactly as I have been told." Paul had long since learned the truth that there is nothing in this world more certain than a promise from the God of Israel. He summoned his fellow travelers into the peace of God's promise, and he knew it would open the door to faith. God's even greater promise in Jesus Christ.